Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more turkey patterning, and today we've got a very interesting combination to try out, and it's a setup that I think should give us a pretty nasty pattern, if these shells work well with this choke anyway. In theory, they should, but we don't know what's going to happen until we test it, so we're going to find out what they can really do. But first up, for the shells that we're running today, I brought out some more of the Rogue TSS loads. These ones are the 28 gauge, 2 3/4 inch, 1 5/8 ounce payload of TSS 9.5 shot, moving about 1,038 feet per second. Pretty specific on the velocity, but last time we tested these, that number was pretty close. But that's a pretty decent sized payload, and they're 9.5 shot. It's essentially a 20 gauge payload with a smaller pellet, so it's a lot of shot flying down range. So pretty interesting loading to try today, and I really think it's going to perform well through today's choke combo especially. Before our setup, I brought out my Tristar Viper 28 gauge, got a 28 inch barrel on it, and we're going to be running a Patternmaster Code Black Turkey. This one is a 515 constriction. Previous time we tested these Rogue shells, we tried them through an Indian Creek 520, and it was a decent pattern, but with them being a 9.5 shot, those smaller TSS pellets a lot of times seem to prefer a little tighter of a choke. So this 515 Patternmaster has shown us some fantastic patterns, and I figured it would give us a pretty decent shot today as well, assuming that a little larger payload with a smaller pellet size is actually going to work out the way I hope it does with the little tighter constriction in this Patternmaster. So for today's test, we're running it the same as usual. The turkey target is set up down there at 40 yards, and I've got the chrono so we can get our velocity. So let's get you guys a view of that target. We'll take our shot and we'll see what these Rogue TSS 9.5s can actually do through that little bit tighter Patternmaster 515. If it works, I expect it to be a pretty nasty pattern. So let's take our shot and see what we get. All right, that shell gave us 1136 through the chrono. Boss claim is 1,038, so that's 98 feet per second above their boss claim. Last time we tried them, I think we were pretty close to that 1,038 number, so we're moving a little quicker with that particular shell. So I'm curious as we continue to test these how consistent the velocities are going to be. But 1136 for a 1 5/8 ounce payload of 9.5s is perfectly fine. It's going to do the job for sure, but how did they actually pattern? Let's go check it out and see. All right, well, here is our 40-yard paper, and we see some pretty interesting results here. We definitely favored a hair off to the right and maybe a touch low. I don't think that was me. Usually I can shoot pretty well with that shotgun, so it could just be the load and choke combo. It is a pretty hefty amount of payload, so that could be a factor. But we still do have a dead bird here. There's one through the brain and several more down the spine that would have done the job. And obviously, if we had that centered up, it would be much prettier looking on the actual turkey paper. But looking at our core here, which is somewhere in the ballpark of that white barcode down there in the bottom right corner, it's a pretty even spread of pellets. It's not overly tight, it's not super hot, but it's a lot of pellets filling in that central core area. So pretty even spread throughout the main part of the pattern. We do pick up a little bit of voids going on over here just off the right side of that core area, but they're not anything overly detrimental to the pattern. It's just a more broad and open pattern across the board really. Especially as we get to the outer edges of the pattern, we have a bunch of little stringy flyers all around the top, and especially over here off the left as well. There's just a bunch of stuff kind of sporadically scattered all over the place. So it's definitely not the perfect pattern. It's nowhere near the ultimate best pattern we've seen in 28 gauge. But this is pretty similar to what we saw when we tested them through the Indian Creek 520. Just a more broad spread for a core while throwing a bunch of little straggly stuff around the edges. And with how this shell is loaded, they're a 9.5 shot, which on its own can be a little finicky sometimes, but usually it prefers a little tighter choke constriction. However, these are a 1 5/8 ounce payload in a 28 gauge shell, which is the same type of payload you get in a 20 gauge shell. So it's a lot of them crammed into that tiny little 28 shell as well. So a little bit of a mixed bag. And we're probably going to have to play a little bit of the balance game here. Enough constriction for the pellets to actually perform and group tight, but maybe a little more open of a choke as well to get that amount of shot to pattern tight. We've tried 520 and 515. I don't currently have anything tighter than 515, but I do have a True Lock 515 and a Carlson's 520 we can try, as well as I think my stock flush full choke for that gun is somewhere pretty close to 525. That could be a surprising option as well. We've got some more tuning to do on this, but for this pattern, it would obviously be 40 yard capable, no doubt about it. And for somebody that prefers a little more leeway in their pattern, that might be what they're looking for. It would be a decent youth option as well, if you didn't want to or couldn't legally run a 410. But this might just be what this shell is capable of, just a little more broad and even of a spread than anything else. I still think we can refine this a little more. It might not get tighter, but if we can bring in those scattered edges some and actually have a pretty even, condensed, and circular spread, that might be what we're looking for out of these loads. So this isn't bad. It's plenty capable, but it hasn't performed anywhere near what some other TSS loads have done in 28 gauge. So we got more testing to do, and we'll see what direction it likes as to whether it prefers a little more choke or a little less choke, but still not much difference it would seem between 515 and 520. And here's the wad out of that shell. It opened up pretty much perfectly evenly. There's nothing stuck down in there. There's no major damage or anything. Nothing snagged on any of the pedals. So really, I think it did about as good as what it could have done. Maybe with a little less choke. We don't peel these pedals open as much, and that might help control that entire big shot column that shell has. But like I just said, we're going to have to do more testing and see what happens with different constrictions. But for today, this wad doesn't look like anything out of the ordinary. Alright y'all, well, what did you think about that result right there? It's not a bad pattern by any means. It's just not one of those super screaming tight, super hot condensed spreads. If you prefer a little more leeway, that might be what you're looking for. But other people might prefer a little more condensed of a pattern overall. That would still absolutely do the job out to 40 yards. A turkey's not going to make it through that. If you center that pattern up, it's going to be more than capable. But I think we might have to play a little bit of the balancing game like I just mentioned with these shells. Try them through a couple different constrictions, and if we can condense the outer edges down and clean it up a little bit, that might be what we're trying to get from these shells rather than one of those super tight patterns. I don't think our 515 blew our pattern apart like some people said it would the last time we tested these through a 520, but I don't think it really helped us condense down any either. There's not a massive difference here overall. So we definitely got some more testing to do, and we'll see what we can get through a couple different types of chokes, brands of chokes, ported, non-ported, different constrictions, and who knows, maybe even the stock full choke that I believe is pretty close to 525 might work decently well with these shells. But you'll have to let me know your thoughts down below. Is that about what you expected to see? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any of these 28 gauge Rogue turkey loads? And if so, what kind of results have you seen? Is that a pattern or a combo you would hunt with? Would you prefer to see it a little bit tighter or a little more cleaned up than that? Or are you somebody that likes that little bit extra spread and a little bit more leeway? Because that would be pretty nice to have in at closer range. As well as, what other choke combos do you want to see me run these shells through that you think might be a good performer? Let me know all that down below. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All that information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.